right, so here we are, folks. Episode number 11, I think, Bob.
Wow, we've
two
done
guys.
11 of these
I
already.
know,
That's
11.
exciting.
Two guys in the cloud. And actually, this episode is, I think, very exciting. I know it's sprawling, and I know it's going to become thought-provoking and probably create a lot of angst. And, of course, we're talking about security. And with us is Riaz. Riaz, help me with your last name. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing it correct.
It's Butt.
Okay. So Riaz joins us. Now, this is actually a first for us here at Two Guys in the Cloud, is that Riaz is joining us from Pakistan. We have a guest.
International.
We
This
are
is big,
international.
Big time.
So that's just incredible to me. I'm so excited about that. So Riaz, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You know, it's interesting technology. I'll go and, age myself again. I can remember when, you would call internationally and there would be a delay and everything. And it feels like Riaz is in the next room. So it's just amazing to me.
Yeah, agreed. And that we're doing all this, over the web with video and all of it. It's just incredible. So Riaz, huge conversation around security today. And what I'd love to do first is, we've sort of made a tradition here of doing hey, how did you get to this place? What's your background? I mean, what brought Riaz into the world of technology and then the world of security?
Sure. Actually, when I started my career, it was more of a system support engineering, and I was more interested in actually the network side of the house. So I actually started my career as a system engineer, and I got a chance to work on Exchange, and that's where my love for Microsoft started. And I started working on Microsoft solutions like Exchange, Link back in the days, and then SharePoint, and slowly move over to the cloud. But for the past 4 to 5 years, working with my enterprise customers all the time, security is one of the key area that I have seen with a customer that they are missing in their solutions, or the rapid changes that are coming in from the vendor side. They're not able to keep up to the speed with those changes that are coming in and how they can protect with that. So that's where I actually started to work more and more around security back in 2014 and 15, if I remember correctly. And then again, this year, it was huge for me because I was able to pass my CISSP and CCSP exam within 1 year with my single attempt for both exam.
Congratulations.
I don't even believe that, but it is what it
is. Good for you.
Yep. So now with, looking at the reports and the trend that's going on, especially the recent one, which we all have seen with the FireEye as well with the red team tools. So I think it's today we live in an era where we have cloud, where we have, analytics, where we have data, and the missing component is the security. And we do have the tools and everything available, but for an individual or an organization to be successful, one side when they're leveraging the cloud to have, running their workloads in the cloud with an ease of deployment, we need to make sure that we have the automation and we have the required tools and the products that can help that automation as well to work in a secure way. Otherwise, this automation where we can build thousands of servers, just an example, within 5 minutes, is not going to help us if it's not secure.
Right. Security is such a big topic, right? Riaz, it could go many different ways. But with that said, I'm really interested in digging into some of your Exchange to Lotus Notes stories. Do you think that'd be relevant to the audience? Elliot? I'm just kidding, everybody.
No, I mean,
that's back in my day when I was selling Exchange against Lotus Notes, the good old days.
Yeah. I mean, I remember those days too. Yeah, Riaz, it's good to get the background. It really helps. I mean, I always appreciate the journey that, each of us have been on to get where we are. So today you're on the security staff at Insight. So what does your typical role look like, or what's your, how, if you were introducing yourself today, how would you do that?
So today I'm actually leading a team for our enterprise customers where I'm responsible for the delivery of this solution around Azure, Microsoft, or I would say the Microsoft stack along with security. And when I say security, we talked about the application security, the CASB solutions, identity security, their security operations, and in some form, I also help the team to actually do the security engineering and architecture work for the customer too.
Perfect. Okay, that makes a ton of sense. All right, good. So, and I know that we don't have to keep our box of conversation today to just Microsoft. I'm sure we could go all over the place, but I know we'll end up spending a ton of time around Azure. But yeah, I mean, I guess I was thinking about this conversation and wondering where to start, and I guess I'm thinking maybe we want to talk about security in the cloud. So what's unique about the cloud versus what I think we may have said is a traditional environment or non-cloud environment? What are the things you have to really worry about first and foremost from a cloud perspective if you think about security?
I mean, if we think about the security, actually, there are two different parameters from a cloud perspective that we need to consider, right? At least what I look at from a security perspective. The first one is your identity. We need to make sure that your identity is secure, because the reason is in our native environments or the legacy environments, where if even I know your identity and your username and password is known to me, I am getting into your environment through your firewall. So your might be your security firewall team. Actually, they have the rules to deny my request, right? But with the cloud, your identity, once it's being compromised as a bad actor, anyone can access your information. And then from there, they can actually get into your organizational data as well, because there's access from anywhere. And that's what we had a benefit from a cloud perspective too. So first one is the identity that I should look at when I talk to the customer. And then you actually branch it out to the other parameters on the security side as well, like your data in the cloud, right? And this is one of the biggest misconceptions from a customer perspective. And I have seen this with some of my friends as well, as when we talked about the data security in the cloud, like in Office 365 or AWS or Azure or GCP, what we have is that as a customer, we need to understand this one is, even though the data is uploaded to the cloud on the any public cloud provider, the confidentiality and the security of the data responsibility lies with us, not with the cloud provider. If we have a data breach, it's not the fault of the cloud provider, it's our fault. So at the end of the day, we will be on the hook for the data breach. Even though we can have the backend conversations, the legal stuff, which I don't want into the have a conversation to that, but at the end of the day, it's my data. I made a decision to upload that data to the cloud, and from a compliance and legal perspective, I'm responsible for that data breach, even though it's it's a misconfiguration or it's something on the public cloud provider side that caused a data breach, but I am the one who is responsible for that data breach.
Yeah, and from a legal perspective, from a liability perspective, is that what you're saying? It's
Yes.
from a technical perspective, yes, absolutely. The data may exist within the cloud infrastructure, but I have made a commitment to my customers or my stakeholders to take care of that data. I'm the one who chose to put it into the cloud. So, in the end, I'm responsible regardless. So yeah, and that's fair and that's real. And you're right, it does create this legal conversation, which I think is, I've always been fascinated by the intersection of legal and technology. It's always changing, and it's always hard for legal to catch up with the development of technology. And this is certainly one of those areas. But let's get back to identity really quick. So when we talk about identity, I'm immediately brought to authentication, or what is identity? And I guess what you're saying is the protection of your identity first and foremost. Is that fair? And
Yeah, I mean,
maybe we could talk about that.
Yeah, when we talk about the identity component, we need to understand is in the cloud, everything that you have permission and access perspective, that access or the permissions, they are tied up with an identity. And as an identity, I'm referencing a credential information, right? And that credential information is assigned to a user, like you have a user account, Riaz has his account, Bob has his own account as well, right? So what a bad actor or external party, when they're trying to get into that data or information, they're trying our account or named identities, right? My username and my password. So that's why in that cloud, when we talk to the customer and when we talked about the cloud identity security, we have multiple controls that we can do. Like as of today, I mean, if you ask me, I would say multi-factor authentication at minimum is the baseline that we should have in place. And then the second one, which I actually look at is, again, you can go into the deep dive into the, device management, compliance policies, and, geofencing and those type of things. But your multi-factor authentication is the minimum that you should have enabled for all your user accounts, because username and password, it's not hard to break that one, right? Especially when you're against a public cloud. And I mean, you can use a public cloud service as well to actually hit and try different brute force attack and different patterns for the password. And you will be able to actually break one or two users accounts easily, because just an example, mostly the vendors or the contractors, they tend to create simple passwords because they're working for multiple customers, and they don't want to remember complex passwords for each customer, right? So they usually tend to have simple passwords for the customer so that they can easily log in, and that password does meet their complexity requirement as well. One of the example that I used to give to my colleagues and my friends as well is like, hey guys, usually what we see from a password policy perspective is 8 characters, right? With uppercase, lowercase, and special character. And I can easily meet this password policy by having a password of ABC at 123 dollar dollar. That does meet your complexity requirement. That does meet your, special character, numeric character, lowercase, and that's what the default that comes in with Active Directory. And if
So
someone needs to break that password, it's literally less than 2 minutes.
great. So Riaz, so obviously this is important. Can you talk about what happens when a client doesn't do this? I would assume we're talking about things like ransomware attacks. You mentioned bad guys, right? But what are you seeing that happens to a client if they're not following, good security protocols in the public cloud?
I mean, again, if we're not following the good security protocols in the public cloud, we are actually vulnerable, right? There are a lot of vulnerabilities available. Just an example is, I even have seen the clients using a basic authentication protocol, which sends your information in clear text, right? Your username and password. And if I sniff that information on the network, I can clearly see what type of data you're sending and you are receiving the data, right? And I can just do a copy of the data. And
So
then,
wait, really quick. When you say sniff, right? Can you expand on that for 2 minutes, just for the folks that may be listening and don't understand exactly what you're saying, because it's fairly insidious, and we take it for granted that you can do this, right? And I'd love for you to, if you could just sort of flesh that out a bit, just to saying, this is what people can do. This is what bad people can do to a network. Just can you go into that for a minute?
yeah, sure. So network sniffing is like what we do is we capture the network traffic with the help of a third-party tools, or I would say with the help of tools only. And those tools actually capture everything that you send on the wire, right? You're sending your credit card number information, just an example, your authentication username and password information. You're sending your, any other sensitive information on the wire. Once I actually sniff that, I can easily extract that information from the tool in a human readable form, and I can see what that data looks like.
Wow.
Right.
And let's
So
say you are sending
so
your
when you
credit card
say,
number.
yeah, so when you say on the wire, you mean on the internet. And
Yep.
in effect, it's like putting a bug on a telephone. You can grab all that data and I'm sorry, and some of that data, well, I would imagine if it's authenticated, I mean, if it's encrypted data, you would get the encrypted. You wouldn't be able to decrypt the data with a sniffer. You would just get the raw, the data that hadn't been decrypted, right? Or
Yeah.
help me understand that.
So yeah, so when I say the basic authentication or the legacy protocols does not encrypt the data from one point to the other point. So it's going in a clear text.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's very easy, right? With the modern authentication, right? When we talked about a modern authentication, what it does, it actually encrypts the data from the source to the destination. So even though, let's say, if you sniff that data from a corporate network, just an example, you sniff the data, it's going to be very hard for you to decrypt that data.
Right.
I'm actually
So,
adding a complexity for you before you can read that information.
which makes sense again. Yeah, and that's the thing with this conversation is you can just end up going deeper and deeper and deeper. So I have taken you away from Bob's original question. So I will revert back to that. So you were talking about, I think ransomware and what happens, along the lines of what happens if they don't do these protocols.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, so what we have seen is, these basic authentication protocols or a multi-factor authentication, because your password, as I said, that, based on, is just my reference information that I have is, most of the organizations, they actually use the password policy of 8 characters, right? With uppercase, lowercase, and I give you the example that ABC at $1 to $3 does meet that password complexity requirement, right? And to break that password is less than 2 minutes job, right? So as a bad actor, if you do not have any second factor authentication like RSA or semantic or duo or Azure authentication or something, the bad actor, once they break the password and they get into your systems, they can actually do a lateral movement path to your administrative accounts in the organization so that they can exfiltrate your data. And your data is what you are trying to secure all the time. Once your data is being gone, then you are actually on the risk.
And I think just back to your earlier point, the difference with the cloud versus, let's call it the on-premise environment is that there's just so many different ways to engage or interact with your network. What I mean by that is mobile or, Internet of Things or being on site. There's just so many different facets or ways to engage the network where your identity can be stolen. And that, I think that's the first point, right? So whereas in a traditional environment, you have to maybe sit down in front of a workstation, authenticate into that workstation. That was that only point where you may have had risk associated with your identity. But with the cloud, that identity goes with you. It's with the phone, it's with wherever else you are, authenticating from different devices anywhere, right? So because of those multiple points of vulnerability, that's one thing that's different about the cloud when it comes to security versus the traditional environment. I think that was the first part in that conversation. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Yep, that's right.
Okay. And then, okay, so, getting back to this idea of ransomware, right? I think Bob was, onto something there. It's like all these bad things can happen, and every day it seems like we hear and see about a new iteration of what the bad guys can do. And of course, when we're talking about ransomware, it's when a bad guy grabs very sensitive data and says to, in effect, the corporation or the organization, if you want this data back, you're going to have to give me money. And if you don't give me money, I'm going to publish it out to the community, and then that sensitive data will be exposed. And people pay that money, by the way. I find that fascinating. And then, and then there's anything else that can happen. Have you worked on a ransomware type scenario?
Yeah, we actually, even at Inside, we have worked on some of the ransomware attacks as well with the customers, where they were being attacked. And again, there are different methodologies to resolve that, right? And one example is because what a ransomware is, we need to understand that, right? A bad actor or someone is encrypting your data, and you, as an individual, you don't know how to decrypt that one. So either you pay me and I will give you the decryption keys so that you can decrypt the data into a normal form, right? Or if you have a backups available, that's why backup is really, really important as well, is if you have a backup available, you can simply restore your data from the backup. If your backups are compromised as well, then there's a different situation, right? Then you need to work in a different way.
Okay, fair. And I appreciate the way you corrected that. So it's not that I've got the data and I'm going to expose it. It's like you can't use the data until
I'm going to lock it down.
Yeah.
I'm going to shut your business down. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I'm told that there are customers that actually end up paying this. Have you been in that scenario?
Luckily, not yet.
Okay, good for you. I guess
Yeah,
good for our
that's good.
clients
That's
too.
good.
That's good. I can't imagine being in that situation. I did hear you talk about how that's one reason why backup is so important. Um, so what else are you seeing today? Like, so if this world is always changing. So what's the flavor of the month? What are the vulnerabilities that bad people are exploiting today? What are you seeing?
I mean, again, there are many, but I would still stay focused on the identity side because if even in my own experience as well, I would say probably 6 out of 10 customers do not have MFA even for their administrative accounts as well, which is a huge risk, right?
Yeah, I'm surprised at that number. And so just to connect the dots for folks, MFA, multi-factor authentication, this is the idea that, when we typically talk about regular authentication, we're talking about username and password. And in the world, that we live in, we say that would be something that, and multi-factor authentication is then you have layers of that. So it's something that something that I am. I forget what it is. It's something that
Something
something
you
that
have.
something you have. So, many of us have always been around tokens, right? RSA is a brand that we've heard in our industry for a long period of time. And a token would have some sort of, chip that would allow to authenticate that because I have this token, I'm able to, authenticate in addition to my username and password. Or that token may have a number that is a one-time only number that cycles every 30 seconds, and I can use that number to authenticate in addition to my username and password. And these are just another. And Riaz, I'm sure you've got a dozen other examples that would be good to talk about. But that multi-factor authentication really adds exponential layers of security to my identity beyond just username and password.
Yep, and as part of one of the study that I was reading, like probably 3 or 4 months ago from Microsoft, um, I think in that study report that Microsoft shared is they said that approximate like 78% of the tenants that they have seen or the customers, they do not have MFA enabled. And in the same
Wow.
report, they actually shared the number that if you have MFA enabled for all your users along with your admin accounts, you're reducing the attack vector by 97%.
Yeah, huge low-hanging fruit. Why do
Yep.
you think we have clients that have not done that or do not do that?
Yeah, is it expensive? Because it seems like a no-brainer, right?
No, I mean, it's not expensive to be honest with you. I think it's more of a complexity and the end user education. Sometimes, again, from an organization to organization, there are different variations from an end user perspective, right? Sometimes the user is way too much cooperative and you're good to do it, and it's more of your administrative side of the house, which is having the issues, or they have different controls implemented because of which the security or the IT team feels like they do not need to have MFA enabled, right? And sometimes it's your end user community to whom you're supporting, right? Because again, you need to consider your end user experience as well and the education. Just an example, I mean, I can think of right now the healthcare industry where you have a, shared resources, the shared point is, systems in your hospitals or the medical facilities, which are being used by multiple staff members, right? And then having a multi-factor authentication for those devices or users is a little bit challenging. And then again, this goes beyond to that is, your BYOD policy. You do get a resistance from an end user perspective is I'm not going to use my personal device for corporate application or for my corporate work, right? Because you need to have something for you to do the second factor authentication.
Right.
So, quick question, Riaz. Would you say that most companies have MFA for their on-prem network and data center, but not the cloud, or they just don't have MFA at all?
They don't have MFA at all. I mean, for
Oh,
on-prem,
okay.
I mean, what I was referencing is like we usually get a response. Oh, we have 4, 5, 6 egress points, right, or ingress and egress points, and we have security on those points. We are secure because we know our entry and exit points, so I'm securing them. With the cloud, you don't know your entry point. I'm connecting from my home in Pakistan, I'm connecting from Dubai or anywhere in the world. That's the beauty of the cloud, right? So you
Right.
don't know from where I'm accessing. But again, implementing MFA is not complex or difficult. It's more of a year adoption. And then adoption goes back with the organizational change management, how you communicate, and how much you have buying from your senior leadership team as well.
It's amazing to me how, human beings end up being the weakest link over and over again when it comes to security, in the sense that, like, what I think you're saying, Riaz, is many of our clients won't enable MFA because it creates a inconvenience for their employees who may not want to go through that process, may not understand why it's important, may not want to deal with it on a personal device. And as a result, there's vulnerability. And I think about that as it relates also to privacy. I mean, so often as humans, we've given up, privacy because of the convenience that's tied to the experiences that we've grown accustomed to. I mean, or if you think about identity theft, so often it's because of social engineering. I mean, and how do you overcome something that humans are very complex? How do you overcome that? How do you deal with that?
And to double click on that, I think it's interesting that companies think they're secure or maybe have some security policy or not at risk. And then they all of a sudden open themselves up to the public cloud, and you're just expanding that risk by, 1,000 times, because now you're, like you said, you're open to everybody being able to access it. So even if you feel secure, maybe on your on-prem, and you don't take that same precaution to the cloud, now you're opening it up to more people. And that amazes me. The risk involved in that. So.
Yeah, I mean, so again, multi-factor authentication, again, as I said, it's not complex. It's actually how you design and implement and you drive your adoption, right? If I talked about the MFA options, the typical scenario that comes into mind is, oh, okay, we need to have our end users, they need to have XYZ application installed, whether it's an RSA, whether it's a Duo, whether it's a Azure MFA or anything, right? They need to have that application installed, and then the conversation starts around BYOD or the company on devices as well, how it's going to happen. Then the second one that we think about, again, a privacy component, as you said, Lloyd, but there are other parameters as well based on every user requirement or uniqueness. You have multiple options available that can cater your 99.99% of the user population. And I mean, to be honest with you, like, I mean, in my experience, the customers that I have worked with in the last 5 to 7 years, working on an MFA project or securing the identity projects, the solutions that we talked about with the customers and the implementation, yes, we did get the feedback, during the design or the discovery phases that, we consider this product and we have these concerns either from an end user experience perspective or other business requirements or the application dependencies perspective. But I don't remember a single project where we end up saying, oh, okay, then we cannot do this project because this cannot be done. There
I,
are multiple methods available.
Agreed. I also think, I wonder, Riaz, you live this. I wonder if most of the clients that you get brought into have already experienced a breach, have pain point, and are highly motivated to listen.
To be honest, I mean, again, I'm in the field and I'm doing this work for the last 10 to 12 years now. I think either probably like, when I'm having these conversations with the client, and if they have a breach, then to be honest with you, there's no brainer on that. Oh, let's do this. At that time, it was more of a checklist to get it done ASAP, and they don't care about the end user experience at that moment, right? Their priority is to get it secure right away. So I think it's either one or two customers where this happened. Otherwise, most of the time, it's more of a like, oh, we are expanding our cloud footprint. We are expanding our services that we are using in the cloud. And now we are considering the security, because when we started the cloud, we were doing a POC, and slowly the cloud expanded a lot based on the utilizations and the workloads requirements. And now the security is in conversations to protect everything. Because again, we all know that how the cloud starts with the organizations is like, oh, we're just doing a POC for XYZ service in the cloud, and then all of a sudden they just come to the table and say, oh, we have this solution live in cloud, right? And the security is not even aware of that.
Makes sense. So taking a step back to, I said social engineering because that seems to come up enough too, where as human beings, we end up getting duped into giving up, our information, then become security risk. Is that still a broad conversation? Are you engaged in that an awful lot? How do we help when it comes to that sort of conversation?
Social engineering, I would say this is one of those areas which you can never say that is being resolved or is being done from my organization, because we all are human and we can make mistakes, right? Just like the spam emails and those type of things, it's never a chance that you can say, oh, I will never get a spam email anymore. So
Right.
it's always a continuous end user training and education to make sure they are up to the speed and they have adequate knowledge to identify and report to the appropriate channel, and then the teams can take appropriate actions based on the reporting done by the users.
I'm always worried that I'm going to be the weak link. I'm going to click
We
on.
all are. Trust me.
Yeah, I did that once. I did that once. Hit the wrong attachment and shut my small company's network down for a bit.
Oh my
so
gosh,
that was fun.
I would get sick just thinking about that. That's oh my. I'm so sorry, Bob.
Yeah, that was that was a long time ago, but yeah, and they caught it very quickly, thank goodness. But that was not a good moment in my career history there.
So I guess, Riaz, I know you're in the enterprise space, but as I'm sure you've done work projects in, let's call it the mid-market and then the SMB side. Do you feel as if security gets less important or less value the further, you go down into that segment chain? So if you're in the small business space, do you find that those organizations just don't have, the time or bandwidth or budget to deal with security?
I think it's more of a budget component that I have seen, because mostly the SMBs, they usually have the same IT and a security team, right? The same guy who is implementing the application is the security administrator for that application too. And if I'm the one who needs to implement the same solution and then be the security guy to say that, oh, this application is secure, I will never find issues in my application or in my configurations.
Yep. I always think it's interesting because I wonder if, they just, they hear it. We've all had times to work with, small businesses or to be in a small business, and they're running at such a pace with such cash flow constraints that it's always easy to prioritize something else until it's too late. And I always wonder, how and when you get them to pivot into, making the right investments at the right time. And I know there's not a perfect answer to that, but that, and the thing is, just because you're a small business doesn't mean that, you don't have massive exposure or liability. You may be a subcontractor to a very big organization, and you may have made certain, covenant commitments to that large organization as a vendor or as a partner where you need to maintain certain security postures. And if you don't, you're out of business. There's lots of different ways for that cat, to be addressed. So I think about that sometimes.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think if I remember correctly, I even got a chance to work with one of the customer with less than 10 employees, but they have because they were working something on the medical side, and they have to be HIPAA compliant. So they're they have like 7 or 8 employees, and I was engaged on that project to make sure they're HIPAA compliant, and I was like, oh, okay, they are going to be like a huge organization and stuff like that. But when I did my work, and like, oh, how many employees do you have? 7. Like, okay, because I never saw a customer like, less than 10 seats and they are working to get themselves HIPAA compliant.
Right. Now, the good news is that when you have 7 to 10 employees, it's easy to get your employees to sort of sign up to the right behaviors, right? You're not trying to convince 200, 2,000, 20,000 employees to, do MFA or to be responsive to certain security policies. It's much easier with 7 to 10 employees. So that's a good thing. That's an upside.
Yep, that's right.
So, pivoting to current environment, I guess current news. I think, I don't know the details behind it, but wasn't the U.S. federal government breached yesterday? Wasn't there a big breach yesterday? Am I wrong about that? I think the Treasury Department announced something.
I didn't
Nothing
hear
bad
about it.
So it was a very effective breach.
Well, the NFL was on, so I mean, it was clearly probably.
Okay. I could have sworn I saw something about the Treasury Department, and I always that always blows my mind that we have these very, very, you have to imagine the security that surrounds things like the Treasury Department or the federal government. It's very robust, but we still have those moments where bad guys can breach them, and it feels as if this is, you think about the war on drugs, it's like, is this a winnable war? Can we actually keep up? That's the sort of conversation I think is interesting.
You were correct, Elliot, and they believe it was Russia.
Right. I mean, it's this level of escalation between, nation states and the amount of dollars and resources that's being put into, security or the penetration of other securities. And, in that environment, it seems daunting to think about keeping up at a commercial level. So I don't know. I know, Riaz, I don't know if you have any thoughts on any of that.
Yeah, and just an FYI, I think I'm not sure the breach that what you're referencing, but I do know that there was an advisory, and they actually asked for the U.S. government. They asked for the agencies to power down SolarWinds Orient products because of a recent breach or the security breach into that product as well.
Interesting.
Yep.
So, Riaz, just kind of changing gears here. One of the reasons people move to the public cloud is because they feel like it's much more secure than their environment ever could be. So, and that Microsoft and Amazon and Google have many more resources to be able to help secure my environment any close to what I could as a small business, medium-sized business. What are some of the advantages clients get by going to the public cloud from a security standpoint versus where they are today, for example? It sounds like, MFA is very important, but what are some of the other advantages clients can get by being in the public cloud versus their data center, just maybe right out of the box, moving to the cloud?
Yeah, I think so from a customer perspective, yes, I'm 100% with you. When a customer is moving from an on-prem to the public cloud, yes, they do not have the same level of security that the customer the customer wants to have in their on-prem, because that of security or the product line is available in the cloud, because they're not supporting just one customer, they're supporting hundreds of thousands of customers at a time, right?
Right.
So that's true, because I cannot have, $5 million invested in my data center just for the security products, right? So
Right.
as an SMB, but the cloud provider does have it, and those products are there. But we need to understand that those products and everything which is being deployed on the public cloud provider side, those are more for the infrastructure layer or the underlying infrastructure that's providing the services to me, right?
Right.
For my data security, for my identity security, or any service that I'm using in the cloud, yes, that service is available to me with a default or the baseline configuration. And I have the options to configure the security on top of that as per my needs, because again, that public cloud provider is giving me the service with a minimum security configuration to optimize my end user experience. Because every organization, if they go way too restrictive, it's going to be a pain for every single organization to modify and go, lower the security settings, right? Versus me as a security admin is configuring those security settings, and I'm just doing it as per my requirements. So yes, we do get a lot more security controls, but we need to configure them.
Yeah, but they're
It's a
limited, is
wrong
what you're saying.
perception
Yeah.
that, yeah,
Right.
it's a wrong perception. Oh, I have MFA available, but I need to configure and enable my users for that, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. So I guess for the folks that are thinking about moving to the public cloud that haven't, really understand what your security limitations are once you get there and what you need to protect your data, because it could cost you millions of dollars. Ransomware is real. It is happening to everybody. It's not whether you will be attacked, it's when you will be attacked. And you have to protect yourself. So please understand exactly what you're getting into from a security standpoint and make sure you have the best processes and policies to protect your data once you get there, because you're opening it up to a whole new portal into your organization. And if it's not protected, it will eventually burn you.
This conversation is pervasive throughout the world of technology. We have had it in many different variations, in the sense that, with technology, there's always development, and with development, there's always risk and reward, right? Anything in technology has risk reward tied to it. And, so if you take this conversation, the public cloud, yeah, there's risk going to the public cloud from an on-premise environment, but you're balancing that against the reward of going to the public cloud environment with all the benefits that are in a public cloud, right? And it's the same. If you choose not to go to the public cloud, there are risk reward benefits in making that decision. It's like anything else, and you can mitigate or limit those risks, and really benefit from the rewards that are out there by being thoughtful and methodical, and all of what we've talked about in this conversation. If you get back to what Riaz was saying before, it's, if you just enable MFA, you reduce your risk profile by 97%. That's a very methodical, pragmatic decision that helps you take advantage of the rewards of the public cloud while limiting your risks. It's just about being methodical and thoughtful with any technology. This conversation can be applied, I think.
Yeah. I mean, MFA to me sounds like a no-brainer. It's to me, the analogy is airport security, right? None of us like going
Great
through
one.
airport
That's
security,
perfect
but
analogy.
we know exactly why we have to do it, right? We don't love it, but we have to do it. We understand why it has to be done. I mean, MFA is a no-brainer. Yes, I don't love having to type in a number when I need to get to certain internal applications, but I know why we do it, right? And to me, I don't care how much feedback we hear from folks that it's too hard to do. You have to protect your data. It's a no-brainer now. It's wearing a seatbelt because it saves your life in a crash. You have to get it done. It's a no-brainer.
So Riaz, what if we were to talk about other tools or other I don't know, efforts that a customer can employ to understand
best practices.
where their risks could be? What's, again, the low-hanging fruit there? What can I do to understand where my exposure is today?
I think your data security is the second biggest risk that you need to manage, right? You have your data that you need to actually make sure you have appropriate encryption and security controls applied to that data, and then you need to have the the protection of that data available as well, because right now data uploaded in the cloud, yes, it is encrypted for the data at rest, but it's not encrypted for the data in transit, or it's not encrypted for as per your organization classification and security control requirements, right? Because you have multiple tiers of the data. You have one data which can be consumed publicly, right? One data which is internal to the organization, and then you have further data which can be project specific, department specific, or different categories of the data as well. So you need to make sure that your data is classified and you understand the risk for each data type, right? That public data, if this data is being exposed, right, then what will be the impact to my organization? If I have my internal data exposed, what will be the impact? But if I have my project specific confidential data being exposed, what will be the impact of the organization, and how you protect that data exposure as well? That's the second key component that you need to consider when you're migrating over to the cloud as well.
So one, and this may not be cloud specific. It could be. I'm not sure, but I'm aware of the tool, and I want to bring it up because I feel as if there's other tools, right? But it's along the lines. So I know that Microsoft has a security posture tool that can be run, and it helps identify areas of exposure, and there's a score tied to it. A lot like I know Bob and his team have various tools that are used to establish economic profiles, and I know there are some security components tied to that as well. What like can you talk about that tool? Can you talk about other tools that are helpful that way?
Yeah, I mean, the first. Sorry, go ahead, Bob.
Oh no, that was just some feedback. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought it was you. Uh, okay, so yeah, the Microsoft tools that we're talking about, the tools are really, really great from a Microsoft perspective, because what it does, it's not only looking at your data, but it's also looking at your security controls configurations, right? It's looking at how you are protecting your identities, how you're protecting your device security, how you're protecting your application security as well. And then it's giving you a score, which you can actually automate as part of your SOC operations, to keep an eye or raise an alert to see when your score goes down. Because if it goes down, then that means that something which was configured is being changed, and or it's being removed from the configuration. Just an example is all administrative accounts were configured for MFA again, right? And a new admin is being added, and he's being bypassed from that MFA policy. So your score will go down, right? And then you, as a security analyst, you can actually, you can analyze, and you can then investigate to see like what happened and why it happened, so that you can protect your identities and everything, or other security controls in the cloud as well. Then the other tools that I actually, again, from a different vendors, I would talk about, like Varonis is one of the example. They actually provide the tools for your data scans to give you the information or types of the data that is being stored in your cloud or in your on-premises as well, that you can use, and then what type of classification that you can actually leverage on top of that. Microsoft does have its own solution in their compliance center, like the 365 compliance, where you actually can add different compliance as well to your tenant, and it will evaluate your tenant as per those compliance policies and the data security controls as well.
Yeah, no, it's like anything else in our world. Also, it's people, process, and technology, and that's why I like talking about the tools sometimes, because that can be valuable. Actually, Bob, it makes me think about a question for you. I know that with your teams, frequently you are running what I would call, what I would call version control profiles through, your tools, where you can go into an enterprise and say, okay, they're running this software at these versions.
Yep.
And there are times when that correlates fairly directly to security as well. Right? Am I right about that? I feel like
it does. I'm getting a little feedback. Do you hear that? Okay, better. Thanks. So it's interesting from a security standpoint, from when you're running software. What Microsoft does, obviously, is they have supported and non-supported software, right? If you have older software running in your organization and is no longer supported, that can come with a very expensive maintenance contract to continue the support. So one of the things my team does in one of our assessments, a cloud economics assessment, is really understand if the client has risk in their environment of running unsupported software, because that could easily be attacked. And if you can't support it and it's not maintained, that means you have a risk in your organization. And Microsoft makes you pay a lot of money. The maintenance contracts are gigantic to keep unsupported software. And if, depending on what type of business you're in, and I'll use manufacturing as an example, they will say, I have a business critical application and it hasn't been upgraded and it runs on SQL 2000. And they will say, well, we can't change it, right? We have to have it on SQL 2000. So that is a problem, and they end up paying these large contracts. So one of the features Microsoft has done recently is allowed clients to move to Azure, move those applications to Azure and not have to pay the security contract. That can save clients hundreds of thousands of dollars a year by just moving that application to Azure and have it supported there. So,
yeah, and in that case, you're enhancing your security posture by moving to the cloud.
Exactly.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? I mean, that's the thing with all of this. There's all these different permutations to, the right decision and the right outcome, it seems. So here's another one, Riaz. This will be very controversial. So, of the public clouds that that come to mind, so Azure, AWS, Google, we can throw a couple of others in there. Is there any of them that are more secure than others? Any that you look at and say they're not keeping up? Any sort of broad general characterizations you can make about any of these public clouds when it comes to security?
That's a controversial question.
See, controversial. I want that controversy here at Two Guys in the Cloud.
So I think this is my view, okay, and everybody can have his own view. When I look at these different cloud providers, what I have found from a difference perspective is, and again, it's not because I'm biased to Microsoft, but I think the Microsoft Azure cloud is, from my recommendation, is the best one. The reason that I can say is I had done some security tools, comparisons as well between Microsoft, AWS, and GCP and other cloud providers as well, like SoftLayer from IBM. Microsoft is the only one that actually has their own security products. Every single security solution is being built by Microsoft, right? You talked about MFA, you talked about, the key management, you talked about your controls and everything. Everything being offered in Azure is a Microsoft product, right? Yes, you can bring in the third-party products in as part of your strategy, but in Azure, you name any security solution that's your requirement. There's an offering available from Microsoft to fulfill that requirement. For AWS or the other public cloud providers, it's not the same case, right? If you talked about the security tools and the products, they do have their own solutions, but they do not cover the complete stack that you need for your enterprise organization. They have the solutions, but it's through third party, right? And that's what I actually like from an Azure perspective, is because all the security solutions are available through Microsoft. And because it's a native tools and the solutions from Microsoft, they're tightly integrated, and the data flow and everything is end-to-end encrypted. And as an administrator or even the security analyst, if I have to, analyze any issues, I can easily navigate, and the data is available at every single product. It's not a disconnected solution from an implementation perspective. I'm not saying that AWS or GCP or the other clouds, they have disconnected, but that requires a little more configuration and a little more complexities involved with their configurations. But with Azure, it's pretty simple and straightforward.
No, it's a good call out. I appreciate that. So, the thing about this conversation is it never ends. It'll go on forever. But I think, we have met our natural end for this one because we have a certain time for this show. But Riaz, thank you very much for joining us all the way from Pakistan. That is just incredible, and we really appreciate you spending the time. Yeah, I've learned a ton. So thank you very much.
Same here. Thanks, Riaz.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. All right, all. Thanks for joining us for yet another episode of Two Guys in the Cloud, and we'll talk to you again real soon.
Happy holidays.